Welcome back, everyone, to Unclassified number 17. We have a very eventful week to cover, especially in Washington, where it seems the whole world revolves around Washington right now. But before we get into it all, Preston, I have to tell you, I have this quotes app on my phone. It's called PEP, and I downloaded it because I was like, I got to be locked in more. And maybe like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan helped me lock in on being a better YouTuber. I'm posting more. I'm being more intertwined with the global fabric. Anyways, every morning it sends you a quote at 8 a.m., and I think it's for morons, because this is what it sent me yesterday. And I think now that I've been exposed to the truth that maybe this app is for morons, maybe it's for gym bros. Not that gym bros are morons, but you get what I'm saying here. This is
I'm not
definitely
sure yet. I'm interested to see what the quote is.
So it says, a person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So he loses touch of reality and lives in a world of illusion. What?
Have you watched Severance?
Not yet.
We talked about that. So there's a funny part in the show where the guy's brother-in-law writes a horrible self-help book, and it's full of quotes like that, where it's just like they're constantly reading it, and it's really, really bad. But the not to ruin it for anyone, but like people get their hands on this book that don't have access to like anything else at all, and they're like, this is enlightening. Like it opens their eyes, but it is the stupidest quotes. You know, if you can't find yourself, how can you find yourself? It's like that kind of shit. Maybe that's who it's for. It's for the severed people.
Maybe it really is, because some of these things, I'm just like, what? Who is this motivating? I got on here because of Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. I was like, I got to be locked in. I got to be, I got to win 6 NBA championships here in the geopolitical community. And frankly, just let me down. But anyways, before we get into it, Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire. Where do we stand there, Preston?
Yeah. God, some of this stuff happens. There's so much happening in a week that you sometimes lose track of, like, was that recent or was that a long time ago? But we haven't even hit on this yet. So, Ukraine, I would argue, has been under a lot of pressure by the Trump administration. I would argue, in fact, that we've seen a lot of sticks directed at Ukraine and not a lot of carrots in any direction at all to try to get these parties to the table. Ukraine in Saudi Arabia earlier this week said, we are on board for a 30-day ceasefire. And that's what the U.S. wanted to hear. So we turned back on intelligence sharing. We let the weapons. I got a picture this morning of new weapons flowing across the border into Ukraine. They're there. And then Russia said no. Kind of, sort of. They also just didn't really respond. But the way these ceasefires work is you can't have one side that says we're going to have a ceasefire. That's called surrendering. So both sides have to say yes. And something that I think is worth hammering home here is there were no terms to this. This was not like, you have to meet these preconditions or something. It was exclusively stop fighting for 30 days so we can have some room to try to work towards a negotiated settlement. It might not have produced anything. And they might have hit 30 days and said, like we've seen in Israel a couple times, let's push it out another 30. Let's keep this thing going for a little bit while we still work to hash some of this out. That was it. It was, hey, Russia, stop killing people for 30 days. And essentially what happened was it wasn't a shock for anybody who's been following the conflict, because Russia has never indicated that they are anywhere near wanting this thing to end right now, unless it's a complete capitulation to their terms. But Putin talked about it and essentially said, yeah, peace, great. We love peace. We would like peace. However, we got all these objectives that we need to meet. And he essentially laid out like their pre-war objectives of Ukraine not in NATO, not in the European Union, no EU or NATO peacekeeping forces on the border, territorial control over areas that they don't even have territorial control over quite yet, and a demilitarized Ukraine. So Putin saying, yeah, at that point, we're all about a ceasefire. I don't know. One of the frustrating things for me this week, Ben, was watching the narrative shift. Previously, it had been Ukraine is the problem. These guys don't want peace, and I think that was not accurate. And they just said, we're on board. And Russia said no. And now the argument I'm hearing is, well, why would Russia agree to a ceasefire when they're winning, when they're on the advance?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's the narrative. These people don't actually want peace. They want a deal for deal's sake, and they also want Russia to win. So What do you think about these crocodile tears you see everywhere? People say we just want people to stop dying. What do you think?
That's actually really frustrating because it's maybe crocodile tears is the right way to put it. Zelensky actually had a really good post this past week or 2 weeks ago where he said nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. Like, are you kidding me? Their cities are being bombed day and night. Like, who I've never seen anybody argue we should just continue fighting for the sake of fighting, like, at all. Of course we want to save lives. Of course we want less war. That's a good thing. My frustration is that term tends to be used only at certain times to drive certain narratives. Like, if we really truly cared about finding a stop to the killing, we would make sure that this is not just a temporary short-term solution, but a long-term solution. And I'm not sure what we've seen so far at all from any administration has a long-term solution on the table right now.
I am fully convinced that these people are going to start a third world war.
When you say these people, what do you mean these people?
The Trump administration and their crocodile tier enablers.
You think a third world war is more likely right now?
Yes, with the way they're going about with this peace deal, peace at any price, I think you're like they don't. Maybe Marco Rubio does deep down inside, but Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. Okay, I mean
Rubio's a changed man, my dude.
Yeah, whatever happened to him? And Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. He just wants a deal for deal's sake, and he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. But it's awarded by Europeans, so he's never, ever, 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 ever going to get it. They'll give it to us before they give it to him. And I just think it's a nightmare walking here. I just don't really know what they're doing. They want peace at any price, and as we learned in 1938, it does not end well. So, go ahead.
Have you seen I think it's on Netflix called Munich?
No, not yet.
You should check that out. It's a couple years old, but it's that whole series of events around the Munich conference. It's really cool.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah.
No, I haven't watched any World War II films lately. I think the last one I watched was Churchill. Have you seen that one?
No.
Oh, it's about Churchill. Yeah, that was anyways. So,
all right. Well, the one of the things here, the big outstanding question is what now? Because we've, for better, for worse, and I would argue maybe even for better right now, we have a bit of a mask-off moment where we see, okay, a lot of people who've been following this conflict have said Russia is not interested in a peace deal right now. Mm-hmm. And we've never really had to force their hand into saying anything, and they did, kind of. I want to be clear, like Putin didn't sign on a dotted line and check the box no. He's tiptoeing around this thing because he understands that coming out and saying a hard no isn't good for him either. But what now? What does it look like when we applied pressure to Ukraine? And we did, and I think even the administration says that they were applying pressure to Ukraine, so I don't think that's my interpretation. And we got Ukraine to the point we wanted. And we have not been successful getting Russia to move, like, at all. So what now? And I haven't seen anything yet. To me, that's what this whole next week is going to be about.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to have to figure out how to get Russia to agree to a deal. And what I think they're going to find out, the Trump administration is going to find out what everyone else already knows, which is you're not getting them to the table. Do you think that's an accurate read of it? That there's really nothing they can possibly do short of threatening to deploy U.S. troops that can get Russia to come to the table?
I'm going to nitpick a little bit. I think they can get Russia to the table. I think the U.S. can get to a point where the two parties are negotiating. Mm-hmm. I think we can get there. I think anything beyond that is very hard to envision right now. There's going to have to, if the U.S. wants to be involved in this, like Russia has said a couple times, if I'm not mistaken, that they have no problems meeting with Ukraine to talk about this. I think. I could be mistaken there. And then Ukraine's take has been, we're only going to talk about it into the war. Like, kind of maximalist demands in both directions. But I don't think getting all three parties in a room is that big of a hurdle quite yet. It won't be Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, but, some deputies, some key cabinet members maybe. But there's not a solution here quite yet. There's not.
Oh, go ahead.
Russia doesn't have the capabilities right now to win this war short term. They might be able to long term, and that depends on U.S. and European assistance and a lot of other things. But Russia cannot win this war to the degree that they want in the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days, maybe even the next year. At the same time, Ukraine does not have the ability to push Russia back from some of these areas and retake lost territory, and they certainly don't have the ability to put enforce some sort of security guarantee. Not by themselves, not right now. So there's a gap in both directions, where right now Russia cannot achieve their goals in a timely manner, and Ukraine cannot achieve their goals without some sort of external factor.
I agree with you. I also think if you're Vladimir Putin, you're looking at the writing on the wall right now, right? You're thinking, well, if we're going to make any gains whatsoever, we have to do it now. Because even if we can get Trump to cut off aid to Ukraine, even if we think we can get Ukraine to do more unforced eras or whatever, the writing on the wall is there. I mean, Germany is arming fast, right? The rest of Europe is there. Last week, we saw Europe invest all combined $3 trillion into their military, into their ammunition plants, into everything.
I love Germany. Got a lot of great German friends. Some of the memes in the last week about watching the German industry rearm have been hilarious.
Yeah. I saw one that was, it was like the balls of the countries, you know how like countries represented like balls? And it was a Polish one saying, Germany needs you to rearm. And they're like, you want me to roll your tanks across Poland? It was great. But yeah, I mean, Europe, it's coming. It is coming. Russia has reaped the wind, so now has sowed the wind, now it'll reap the whirlwind or whatever it is. And I think if I am Russia, you got to make as much gains as possible in hopes maybe you can freeze it, or maybe you get the U.S. to force Ukraine to surrender in some way. But because I mean, you can't once Europe is rocking and rolling, cruising for a bruising, I don't really see how Russia stands any chance whatsoever in making any gains going forward.
But there's no indication at this point that anybody's going to do anything like that. Like, yes, Europe is standing up arms manufacturing and they're transitioning some of these factories over. That's going to be long term. Mm-hmm. And even if it is, let's say they manage to churn out their first artillery shell in 3 months or something, right? Because this stuff takes a while. Even then, you're just talking about ammunition and weapon systems going into Ukraine. That's not going to be the deciding factor. That'll be the factor of how many Russians does Ukraine kill as Russia likely takes more and more territory. That will not end the war, though. Like, that deciding factor is going to be a matter of, does Germany put boots on the ground? Does the United States enforce a no-fly zone over the Donbass? Like, that determining factor is still off the table from everything I've seen.
That's fair. Do you think it's time for a new Western policy when it comes to Russia?
I think it would probably depend what you'd say today's policy is.
I think today's policy is one of accommodation, where they went into Crimea, then they went into the Donbass. Now they're in Ukraine. I guess they also went into Georgia before Crimea. They're doing all this, right? And the Russian studies that are done in Germany and the United States say, well, we're just not understanding. They need more room. They need a buffer, blah, 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 blah. Do you think it's time for a new policy? I'm not saying, I want to preface this, I'm not saying we should bomb Moscow. But what I am saying is that bombing Moscow is just as insane as the current policy we have towards them, which is one of accommodation. Thoughts?
That's quite the take. Jon Stewart had some good stuff recently where he said he was pushing back on how everything sounds good when it's compared to World War III. Well, I should start doing that. Like, this isn't an ideal position, but the alternative is World War III, so get on board. I would agree that we've been fumbling a lot in regards to Russia really since the end of the Cold War. I can't remember where I came across this assessment. It's not mine personally, but it makes a lot of sense, where it said following the end of the Cold War, Russia looked at this rivalry, if you want to call it, with the United States and said, okay, we're not keeping up with their economy, we're not keeping up with their military. That didn't work. Like, that arguably brought about the end of the Soviet Union. So they transitioned into the information space and have been very, very good at that, where we've been lagging. And we continue to grow our economy and continue to grow our military. And I will stand here today and say that we have a much stronger, much more lethal military than Russia does, without a doubt. The information space we've ceded, and we've had a really hard time getting that back. And that is only one piece of the puzzle. But they've also figured out this little green men thing that they're doing with their private military companies. And we just don't have a good answer for that. Are they Russian? Yes, but they're not. Like, so what do we do? Do you sanction Russia? No, because it's a private company. Do you sanction the company? Yeah, but it's also like part of the Russian government. And like they played that very well in Crimea and the Donbass. These little green men moved in, and we did not have a solution to it. And I think the argument, like to say that we didn't have a solution, is we didn't do anything. There was no real U.S. or European action, all things considered. And then Russia was like, all right, in 2022, it's go time. It's a little bit surprising to me that in 2022, they didn't just ramp up that little green men policy, because that worked pretty well. But we've seen the same thing in Africa, where they've got this hybrid type warfare, where they're not just rolling in with their economy like China is in a lot of ways, but they're rolling in with an armed group that is straight up a military, like it is a military force. This is not a small militia out of backwoods Tennessee. Like these dudes have MOD helicopters and tanks and armored personnel carriers, and the logistics train is put together by the Russian government, but they're just a private company. And then they tie into the information space, the information warfare in some of these countries, and we do not have a good solution to that right now.
I think in Trump's first term, he did have the right solution, which was at one point in Syria, he hit, they called over the Russians and said, is this your military base? Because it's housing chemical weapons. And they said, no, those aren't our guys. So they just bombed it. And, well, it's unfortunate that those Russians died, but apparently they weren't Russians, so it doesn't matter. And they also solved it at the Battle of, is it Kashim, where the Wagner attacked the U.S. Special Forces, and they were just bombarded by every single thing in the U.S. arsenal. I think that's the answer. I mean, if they're not Russian, then they're a rogue force that must be dealt with, right? So I think we have the answer to it. Am I wrong?
There's a great memorial to the Wagner fighters that were killed at that attack in Syria, where it's a dude with a PKM machine gun pointing it up at the sky and firing. Like, bro, those are Reaper drones flying at 18,000 feet or something.
Yeah, you're not
trying to shoot these drones out of the sky, or AC-130 gunships. Dude's got a machine gun, small arms pointed to the air. It was a bad day for the Russians there. I don't know. Are you saying that we should do a reset with Russia? Do you have a reset button?
No, the road to hell is paved with Russian resets. I think there should be no reset. I think there just needs to be a new stance, which is, I'm not president, and maybe that's for the best, but I would just draw a line in Ukraine and say, if you cross it, we're going in. And they can threaten nuclear weapons all they want. But this isn't any different than the Cold War. The Soviet Union threatened nuclear weapons all the time. So did China when they got them. That didn't change anything. And if you want, more instances of this, the United States threatened China with nuclear weapons several times during the Korean War. And China kept going forward. I just don't know what's changed, that all of a sudden we believe these nuclear threats are real and we're allowing them to constrain us. While throughout 80 or 90, how long is Cold War? 50 years? The 50-year Cold War, we didn't let that happen at all. It just, everyone, you made nuke threat and everyone just ignored it because they're just like, you're not actually going to do that. So I don't know what's changed. I don't know why everyone's lost their mind over this. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe it's the information space that we've really been hit on here.
I feel like part of it ties in with kind of this wave of isolationism, if we can call it that. Mm-hmm. I heard somebody push back on it recently, saying it's not isolationism exactly, but you know what I'm getting at, where there's been a movement to say we should not be involved in just about anything overseas. And I think the gutting of USAID might be kind of an indication that there's some push in that direction. It's not just no foreign wars, it's no foreign involvement to a degree. And I don't know how strong that push is in the government, but either way, I think that plays into it a little bit, because when you talk about the threat of a nuclear attack, it's not necessarily that a nuclear attack would end the world. It's that a nuclear attack would draw us into a war. So then the question, I think what's happening is the question then becomes, is there anything in Russia or along Russia's borders where we would be interested in getting into a world war? And I think for most people, the answer to that is no. And I think that's where it hits is, again, I think this goes back to, we struggled to explain, and it's hard to explain the value of supporting Ukraine to the everyday life of the average American, because it's not super tangible. It's the international global order, the global international liberal order. You know it better than I do. And it's hard to articulate that very, very simply. And I think it kind of gets dumbed down to, do you want to fight for a village in eastern Ukraine? Should the United States go to... And how many times have you heard this repeated in news segments of people saying, I don't want nuclear war over the Donbass? It's like, yeah, right, of course. What's happening here? So to me, there's a part of that involved as well, that isolationism thread.
I think I think something has fundamentally changed in the American psyche. I've been listening to a lot of Reagan recently, reading a lot of Reagan, reading a lot of books from the 70s, 80s about this world order. Something's changed because the American people after World War II willingly took on this like security role and this like world order role, and they embraced it, and it was like, yeah, injustice anywhere's injustice everywhere. And this idea that we can't let communists and fascists write the rules. And now it just seems like the American people are just like, nah, who cares? Like, even if you told them that, like, for only $2 in your taxes every year, you can ensure world peace just by, like, not moving troops anywhere, they'd still say, I don't care. I want the $2. I don't know what's happened. And I think my hypothesis is that as a sacrifice, as those who gave it all, who lost family members in World War II, who lost, I guess I was going to say who lost their own lives, but that doesn't make any sense.
They probably don't remember that, yeah.
No, they don't. But as the memory of World War II fades, so does the greatest generation's greatest gift to us, which is the international world order. I mean, this is a group of people who saw war twice. They saw a Great Recession, they saw disease, and they sought out to make a world that was warless, that was diseaseless, that was hungerless, that was povertyless. And now we're just ripping it apart because we've gotten so used to the liberal world order that we just think this is the way it is. And I think that's going to be a startling realization for everyone, especially as we are coming on the 50-year anniversary of Live Aid, you know, that concert they had at Wimbledon and also here in the United States to raise money for, I believe, famine, or was it AIDS? Some crazy disaster in Africa. And on that 50-year anniversary, they're projecting a famine in Africa to happen, right? So it's, I don't know. People are going to learn very quickly how big of a role the United States had, and hopefully they change their mind, because otherwise things are going to get really bad, and I don't want to live in a pre-1945 world. I think that's a disaster. Thoughts?
It's an interesting, I think you're right, and that probably helps to zero in on a lot of this, is just to say quite simply, the American people have changed. We have changed.
Yeah.
Just as a whole. So it's very hard to apply, you know, past values and whatever it might be, principles to today, because we're a different people, for better or for worse, probably a little bit in each direction. I would agree that coming out of, especially those that came out of World War II or were aware of what was happening in World War II, they saw evil, and evil in a way that we hadn't seen in a long time, on a scale that we hadn't seen in a long time, in modern history, really, especially when you're talking about the Holocaust and what was going on across Europe. And I think that maybe framed, you know, we have to do away with evil. We have to be the light in the world. It was, you know, World War II is a clean war in a sense, right? There were bad guys, and we were the good guys because we got rid of the bad guys. Like, to oversimplify everything, of course, right? But And I think that stuck with us for a long time. We were riding that high horse of we are the good guys. We're going to make sure that there's good in the world. That said, it was not a warless world. We fought a lot of wars since then. An argument there has been the wars have not been World War III. So they've been smaller, but there's certainly been a lot. I mean, it's almost been perpetual conflict around the world for sure. Some of them bigger than others, but
comparatively, though.
Right. And this is one of NATO's things that I always have a hard time with is one of NATO's, one of their arguments for the alliance is no World War III. It's like, well, yeah, but we can't definitively prove that because of NATO, there hasn't been World War III. It's all these other factors as well. Like, was it a thing? Yeah, probably. Either way, I'm getting sidetracked here. I agree. There's definitely been a change in the American people and what we value and what we prioritize. It feels like it's more permanent now. It doesn't feel like a trend. There's been past trends, but it really feels like a lot of things are moving in more of an isolationist type direction.
I fully agree. I hope that when push comes to shove, that a larger war does not break out with Russia. Especially one that would involve us having to come back to the continent in a disadvantaged position. So, but moving on here, President Trump tweeted yesterday, in all caps, that Ukrainian troops were surrounded and that he was begging President Putin to spare their lives, to which Ukraine said, "What are you talking about?" I saw you made a video on this, Preston. Fill us in.
Yeah, so this is... Now, Trump didn't say Kursk, but that's kind of what most people assume he's talking about. There is a pocket of Ukrainian forces there. They went in about 7 months ago, took about 1,200 square kilometers of Russian territory, and most people viewed this as an attempt for Ukraine to get an upper hand at the negotiating table. Russia has a lot of Ukrainian territory, so what does it look like if Ukraine has some Russian territory? And whether or not we argue that that was the right move or a good move, it's certainly been a thorn in Russia's side. And we see this across Russian political commentary. They hate the fact. They are livid with the idea that 7 months later, Ukraine still has troops occupying part of Russian territory. Because think about that for a second. This massive military they're wildly successful in Ukraine and everything is going according to plan, but somehow they've lost their own territory and can't get it back. So either way, in recent weeks, Russia has really kicked off an offensive there and really, pedal to the metal to try to likely shore up this position because then they'll be in a better spot negotiating-wise. As we've seen just earlier in the segment, Trump is clearly pushing for some sort of negotiated settlement here. They have pushed Ukraine back, no doubt. It wouldn't be surprising at this point if sometime in the next few days or even the next few weeks that we hear that Ukraine has withdrawn from Kursk. They are in a bad spot there, but they're also not surrounded. The entire back of the formation is up against Ukraine. Now, some of those roads are under drone attack, but that's nothing new. That's been the case for months now. And the reports from on the ground is that, yes, Ukraine has lost forces, no doubt. They've had positions overrun, they've lost equipment, but the casualties and the losses are relatively minor compared with the change of territory. So we did see the Ukrainian forces withdraw pretty quickly, and they've started to move back, and a lot of them have moved back into the Sumy area of Ukraine. But so Trump put this out yesterday, and immediately the armed forces of Ukraine were like, hey, wait a second, we're not surrounded. What's happening here? It's been interesting to see the information space shift today because people immediately went to, well, technically, yes, they are. It's like, well, technically, no, they're not. I don't know what to...
It is bizarre that, like, you're right, the information space is very clear. They're not surrounded. I knew that. I didn't know the full situation in Kursk, but I knew they weren't surrounded. But it is weird to see that he says something, and then everyone else jumps to make sense of it and say it's the gospel, and I'm just like, we know he doesn't read the intelligence briefings, so...
That's one of the more frustrating things right now, for me personally, is when a Russian mill blogger says something, you can be like, yeah, they're just fucking making it up. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
Like, well, no, how about the facts? Like, I don't know. Here's all the other information we have, and there's this one dude over here that said something completely, like, I don't know. It's probably not true. The problem when it comes from our officials or from our president is I immediately yesterday saw comments of like, oh, so you know more than Trump. It's like, well,
Yes.
no, I just like,
The president's a
look,
moron. Yeah.
like him or hate him, the guy has lied before. I don't like.
Has
He's recently hammered this $350 billion thing to Ukraine that his own administration has come out and said, well, actually, it's 170 something billion. So I don't know. Like, I don't know why he would say that. I don't know why he's sticking with that. But like, it's not correct. I don't know what to. There's nothing. Even the Russians at this point are not saying that Ukraine is surrounded in Kursk. They're saying they're closing the noose on the cauldron. They're trying to push them out, and they're attacking from multiple directions. But Ukrainian mill bloggers, some of the most pro-Russian, the ones most prone to exaggerate and claim things have fallen well before they have. Like a drone will fly over a city, and certain mill bloggers will be like, "We took it." It's like, bro, that fighting isn't even like within 10 kilometers of that area yet. Even those guys aren't saying that it's surrounded. So I don't know. I got a lot of pushback as well that like, well, the president has better intel than you do. It's like, look, could be the case. No, of course that's the case. Of course he has better intel than I do. But at least from the publicly available information, everything is not pointing to Ukraine being surrounded, to include Russia. So I don't.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm at the point where if anyone argues with me about whether or not the president knows anything, I just default to my immediate, the president's a moron. And I feel very secure in that conviction. But the one thing I will say, in his first term, there was a story about how he wouldn't read the intelligence briefings. So the way the CIA got him to start reading them is that they just included a bunch of pictures and then had a guy come in and explain what the pictures were showing. And apparently he really liked that. And I just thought, oh, my God. So, I mean, you got that going. But Mark Rutte.
Yeah, tell me about this. You were following this more than I was.
He was in Washington, and he visited. For those who don't know, he's the Secretary General of NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And he was in Washington visiting President Trump, and he was selected. For those who don't know, he was the Dutch Prime Minister before this. He was selected because he's the Trump whisperer, and that he somehow understands Trump in a way no one else does. Now, I would argue that he just agrees with Trump, and that's really what you're seeing here. But Mark's there, and Trump was on his best behavior initially. He was being very complimentary to the alliance. He was talking the way Mark Rutte wants him to talk, which is, because of me, NATO's strong now. Before I came in and told everyone to start spending money, no one was. And so, that's the way NATO wants him to talk. That's the way they want it to be. It keeps him in the alliance. But then it started to get a little awkward because then Trump started taking questions, and you know how it goes. They asked him, will you take Greenland? Yeah. We might have to get NATO involved in that. And Mark's like, hold on. Well, I don't know. I don't have any statement on that.
Easy now.
Yeah, and then he said Canada. And Trump's like, yeah, we're going to take Canada one way or the other. Yeah. And Mark's like, okay. And then Trump was like, we might have to get NATO in on that one. And Mark's like, okay, hold on. No, this is probably not. And he goes, well, NATO hasn't always been very nice to us. And I was like, is this about to be an ultimatum right now? Is he about to say NATO has to assist them in acquiring? But he doubled down several times. And then he started attacking Joe Biden. And Mark is just kind of like nodding along. And I was like, this is what Trump whisper means? It means he just goes along with his, deranged spiels. But I guess so. So he was doing that. And overall, we came out pretty good, right? He didn't, say he wouldn't uphold Article 5. He also didn't say he would either. They didn't ask him, as far as I could tell. And
I don't think we want that question asked publicly, if I'm being totally honest. Because the answer, the answer is not going to be like, there's no way to answer that question right now that wouldn't provide some daylight to Russia or any of our adversaries.
Do you think the press here? So I'm split. I'm split between the press corps instigates things with him, and that they ask him questions that he just then, goes and ruins everything with. And then on the other side of things, I'm also like, well, he's going to tweet it out or say it eventually, so might as well know where he stands. But then also, he doesn't really stand any which way. He just changes his mind. So do you think the press corps instigates when they ask about Article 5, when they ask about Canada and Greenland, or do you think Now, it's fair to ask. He just has unfavorable positions on there.
I'm going to walk right down the middle on that one. I think there are times where they're clearly trying to get him to say something ridiculous just for because they know he probably will, and run with the headline. But other things, like, it would have been a weird question for the majority, I would say, of the last administration to say, will the United States uphold Article 5? Because, like, why is that being asked? Like, yes, nothing has changed, of course. For a lot of administrations, I would even argue for a good chunk of Trump's first administration, that would have been kind of an out of the blue type question. But right now, it's not really an out of the blue type question.
Right.
So I think that's part of it as well.
So we have a question. So after Trump doubled down, we had a question from a viewer for you.
Yeah.
And they said, Preston, will U.S. troops march on Canada if ordered to do so by President Trump?
I really like that we got some questions in today. For what it's worth, I want to keep doing that. I think it's really cool. I like that type of engagement. This is really tricky because at the core, the U.S. military is set to follow lawful orders, and if a lawful order is given, we would expect our military forces to follow that. So it would have to be a lot more detailed than just that. As it sits today, if somebody were to say, we're going into Canada because ABC, it probably would depend on the nuance of that. It's hard to imagine. That's where I'm struggling right now. It's hard to see any justification for moving military forces into Canada, and I'm having a hard time separating my personal bias from this. I don't see a scenario where that would be justified in any way, shape, or form. So then when I look at our military, I think, well, there'd be enough pushback on this to where it wouldn't actually get to that point. Like somewhere along the chain of command, there'd be pushback, and this wouldn't materialize in soldiers having to make the determination: am I crossing the border, or am I going to protest? So I'm a little stuck there. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So there's a lot of talk about a lawful order and what's not, and people saying, well, it's not lawful to attack our allies or whatever else. What is a lawful order? As far as I know, it may be unfavorable, it may be morally incorrect, maybe morally wrong, but is it unlawful for the United States to say, unlawful under U.S. law, to invade Greenland, to invade Canada, to invade Panama? Are these unlawful orders, or are they just morally wrong orders?
It's a mix of it's a mix of U.S. and international law. So wars of aggression are illegal, for instance, which is why, when we go into Afghanistan, we go into Iraq, it's not talking about we're coming here to take territory because we want more territory. It's because we're fighting a preemptive war in Iraq, right? Is how it was framed. So that's one piece. If an order was, for example, we are going into Canada because we want more territory, that would, I would argue, again, not an attorney, not a part of the JAG Corps, I would argue that would probably get some pushback on the legality of that order. Because according to multiple international charters, it is illegal to prosecute a war of aggression, to take over territory. It gets a little more complicated inside of the United States, or with U.S. law, because there is, I would say, probably a lot of flexibility, talking about rules of engagement and things like that. But I'm gonna be honest, man, like this is, it to me, it feels like very uncharted territory. So it's hard to, like, I can't even think of a good example to point to.
Okay. So all this talk of, do you think the talk about, the military refusing unconstitutional orders, unlawful orders, do you think it's very pie in the sky? Because, like, what even is, can you give an example off the top of your head what an unlawful order would even be?
So if today an order came down that the U.S. military at the southern border was to open fire on anyone in the United States in a certain area along the border. So they said, hey, this area along the border, we can't monitor it. It's a free fire zone. U.S. military, kill anybody in there. It's U.S. territory. That is an illegal order. U.S. military does not have the authority to conduct lethal operations on U.S. soil like that. Things could change and different laws could be passed to get to that point. But right now, that's the kind of thing where I would expect pushback. People would say, nope, can't We can't just start shooting people in Texas because we don't know if they're immigrants or not. That would be an unlawful order.
Interesting. Speaking of unlawful orders and death in the United States,
God,
Lockheed Martin
soften it up here a bit, man.
Yeah, has been killed. Portugal and Canada have canceled. Canada's considering it, but they will cancel. So Portugal and Canada have canceled their F-35 orders because they say the United States is not a dependable partner. It also doesn't help that the Trump administration went around threatening everyone with turning off their weapons very early on. So now we're seeing the consequences of that. Thoughts? Now that... Yeah, go ahead.
I want to maybe we bring an attorney on to talk about the international law of war and stuff. I'm thinking more about that because a lot of my experience in the military, you're focused at your level and below. You're not focused on that kind of stuff way up the chain. So like there's been no part of my career that's really been focused on, or any time I was in the military, focused on like what is a lawful order from the president to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and down, like at all. I just haven't really been, that hasn't really been a focus. It's been down. Can we execute this fire mission? Yes or no? No, because we don't have positive identification of enemy combatants, or we have not been able to determine if there are men or there are women and children nearby. It's been the stuff that I'm able to control. So I'm a little bit speaking out of turn talking about the large, big picture legality of military operations. I think it'd be good to maybe pull somebody in and pick their brain on that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
I'll look around for someone. So, all right, so F-35. There's a couple different storylines here, and it's worth mentioning right out the gate that this is just tough talk right now. Technically, we've not seen any action.
Hasn't Portugal actually canceled?
No, because Portugal didn't have a contract.
Oh, you're right.
Portugal was just looking. They're considering replacing their F-16s with a more modern fleet, and they said, we are considering looking elsewhere. But even with Portugal, they even said, like, the F-35 is still in consideration. We're not ruling it out. We're just expanding the scope of where we're looking. So just talk. And the same with Canada, in a sense. Canada has already paid for 16 of their 88 F-35s, or at least put a down payment down. And their defense minister yesterday said they are going to receive those and then look to fill the other slots by other providers, maybe European providers. So again, technically both of these right now are just talk. And I think that's where we have to focus is this just, in this case, Portugal and Canada upset? Both of them, I should say, said that the reason for this was, what was the term they used? Like the volatile U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
In Portugal, they were like, we are concerned that, if geopolitical stances shift, we might be in a tough spot. In Canada, there's a little bit of that, but also Canadians hate us more and more. And there's just straight up a lot of domestic pushback, from my understanding, on signing large military contracts with the United States right now. That's due to the tariffs and the U.S. floating the idea of annexing portions of Canada or moving the border, whatever it might be. So in both of these cases, it is just talk. The Canadian one is a little more real, because they might end up canceling what remains of that contract. But I do think both are worth keeping an eye on. Is this just something to get a headline every so often because it did the trick? Or is this the first step in a trend that could proliferate across other allies? Because that would be a big problem. And you and I have talked about this, and we saw this at IDEX, right? The volume of other defense companies out there that are looking to fill any and all gaps that might emerge. So the F-35 is widely considered like the most capable, the most advanced fifth-generation fighter. It's not the only option out there. And all of these countries, right now, Portugal, Canada, but all others, will have to take into consideration, do we want to further tie ourselves to the United States right now? And I think that's probably being debated.
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't help they went around threatening to turn off anyone's weapons. It doesn't help what they did to Ukraine. But also, I mean, Canada, Portugal, they have a lot of options. They want the F-35 still. They can just get it from Beijing, who is making a knockoff. So, we're at IDEX. We saw a knockoff F-16, knockoff F-22.
Exact replicas. Yeah.
F-35, as well as a Raphael.
Yep. There
Yep.
was a Chinook helicopter, the Chinese Chinook version. Yep.
An Apache helicopter. I mean, folks, this is like they just stole it from the Boeing and Lockheed booths. I mean,
Right.
Northrop
And
Grumman.
just painted a Chinese flag on it. Like it was identical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Identical. Yeah, they totally stole it. So I mean, they can always get it from there. So the U.S. does not have a monopoly even on their own tech apparently. But speaking of monopoly, the Trump administration.
One more thing. I want to say one more thing on this because it's interesting. I think this last week was a bit of an eye-opening moment for probably a lot of people around the world, but definitely a lot of our strongest allies, when the United States turned off military aid to Ukraine in the middle of the conflict.
Yeah.
To get a point of leverage. I think that a lot of our allies probably saw a lot of what we were doing as just tough talk, but when the rubber meets the road, we'll be there. And last week was the first time in my life, maybe I'm wrong, but in my life, where an ally of ours, albeit Ukraine is not a member of NATO, they are an ally of ours, is in the middle of a war fighting for their survival, and we used our weapons supply to leverage them in a direction that we wanted. And I think a lot of our allies, understandably so, looked at that and went, oh shit, that could really be a thing. And it's probably a good move, a bad move for global economics, a bad move for the U.S. defense sector, but it's probably a good move for countries all around the world to look at this and think, how can we onshore as much of our defense manufacturing as possible? Again, I think that's a net negative for the U.S. position abroad, and I wish that's not the direction it was headed, but it's how we look at it. Because every little nut and bolt that doesn't come entirely from the United States is a possible vulnerability in our supply chain in the time of war. So any country that's not making all of this stuff on their own territory has to think about that. And I do think last week was a little bit of like a wake-up call.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I know people look at this and they say, well, that's their own fault, for agreeing to such bad deals or allowing the U.S. to take over their defense. It's easy to say that now, but people forget that for 80 years, the United States has said, we will take over defense. You focus on building an effective economy that we can trade with to make ourselves richer. And so, it's easy for people to poo-poo and act like Europe were idiots or freeloading. But, this was the deal, that the United States takes over defense, and then Europe creates a functioning economy and helps the United States maintain its hegemony. That was the deal until 2016, when Trump just came in and ripped it up for no real reason. And now it's still the situation now, except, they're saying, all right, well, screw you then. I guess we'll take care of our own defense, and what is it called? The liberal deal? The liberal dilemma? I don't know. There's the liberal world order, but there's a word for what I'm describing. This deal between the United States takes over defense and everyone else then makes their economies tailored to the United States. And now that is over, and the American people will soon learn how bad that is. I just hope they learn sooner rather than later, right? Because the reason I say this is if it happens soon, then they can correct, right? And they can say, this is why our grandparents and our parents didn't like isolationism, why they liked this order, and we can maybe salvage whatever's left. If they don't find out until 10 years from now, it's gone. It's over. We're all speaking Mandarin now. This podcast is in Mandarin. So
is Lockheed Martin deep state? Do we call them deep state? Are they part of the blob? How do you yeah.
I guess it
we'd
depends
love
on
we'd
who
love
you're
your
talking
sponsorship, Lockheed. Don't take offense to that.
Yeah.
This could be a sign, or we'll see how much influence kind of the military-industrial complex, if you will, has over the current administration. Because if this perpetuates, it's a major problem for Lockheed and the entire U.S. defense sector. So the Canadian contract was $19 billion. The Portuguese contract was estimated to be around $6 billion. Again, that was not in place. But you're talking about a $25 billion potential hit to Lockheed Martin. They're a big company. They're big boys. They got a lot of money. That's a problem in a lot of ways, especially the Canadian one, which you have to think that the production timelines are already in place in some way, shape, or form. These dang F-35s take forever to actually build. So if you're Lockheed and you're seeing this, there's got to be some level of upset right? Like they're losing contracts. The cost to produce is going up. I don't know. Is there going to be pressure from defense companies?
I gotta tell you, I've been told by so many people that the military-industrial complex lobbies us to get into wars, and they can't even lobby to save themselves money here. So I don't know what's going on there, because you would think, right, the big bad military-industrial complex would somehow knock some sense into Trump, but nothing. I mean, they have no power whatsoever, it seems, at all. So I wonder, what's going to happen there. But that is a good point. Will we see pushback? You'd think we see it by now, but I don't think so.
Nobody knows. Nobody's ever seen it before. Let's
It's impossible to say.
let's talk China. Let's hop over to the Pacific real quick before. I think we got some other questions we want to hit on, but
Yeah.
one of the big questions we had recently that we were kind of keeping an eye on was with the drawback of U.S. AID programs abroad. We said here, like, a smart China move would be, let's go do that exact thing where the U.S. is no longer doing it. I haven't seen much press on that. Have you noticed much on your end?
I know that China has raised their commitments, but as far as I know, they have not taken over PEPFAR, and they have not taken over a lot of the U.S. AID programs. I suspect when things get worse, we probably will. But as of right now, we have not seen that much movement. We've seen commitments, but nothing to say, yeah, we'll do what, Washington has failed to do. We've seen them reach out to Europe. We've seen them reach out to Latin America, but nothing as, we're not seeing food packages that say a gift from the Chinese people. So
Got it.
speaking of China, are you on Instagram Reels at all?
I am on the Instagram, yeah.
Okay, so you watch them, I assume?
Sometimes.
All right. Well, so have you run into Chongqing Trump yet?
No, but I like this. What is it?
So it's a Chinese man who does a Trump impression in China, and he runs into Americans and he does it. It's fascinating. Chongqing Trump is my favorite. He's like, but the companies there, they pay him to advertise it. So, like, he's doing, like, a Chinese hot dog, okay? Or I'm the king of hot pot. And he goes to all these Chinese restaurants and he gets sponsored by them to do an ad for them as Trump. It is the funniest thing I've ever seen before in my life. It is so good. But when you said China, it just reminded me of that, because I was just like...
That's the priority right now, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, this is awesome. But another question we had from the viewers here. What are your thoughts on nuclear proliferation? In Sweden, Poland, South Korea, Japan, do you think any of them will develop them? Do you think they should? And do you think nuclear proliferation good or bad going forward?
You lead off with this one, because I had to dive into the beast of law of armed conflict and will our troops obey orders.
So, here's what I think, folks. I think when it comes to nuclear proliferation, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is the crown jewel of American foreign policy. Perhaps it'll be the greatest achievement this nation's ever accomplished, even if it was for a short time. But basically, they got all the countries in the world to agree, we're not going to make nuclear weapons anymore. And what this meant is that other countries didn't have to worry about their neighbors building them, right? So Germany and Poland wouldn't have to look at each other and say, well, if they're developing them, we need them. That wasn't a thing. And so it eased everything out across the globe. And of course, the less nuclear weapons there are and less nuclear member states, the less likely it is that they're used, the less likely it is that the nuclear taboo is broken. And so one of the ways the NPT managed to spread so far is that the United States just started saying, well, you know what? Okay, we're going to have a nuclear umbrella. So everyone in Europe, you're protected by nuclear weapons. Japan, Australia, Thailand, South Korea, you're all protected by ours. Philippines. And so this kind of soothed everything out. But the French very early on said, well, Charles de Gaulle said, I actually have a hard time believing the Americans would trade LA for Paris, or they would trade New York City for Paris. And perhaps he was always right. I don't know. People have called it a nuclear suicide pact. That's kind of a dramatic way of putting it. But do I think now going forward, now that the U.S. security commitment's actually in crisis, do I think they should develop nuclear weapons? So we're seeing something's going on in South Korea, right? They've been marked a sensitive nation by the United States because they have entertained developing nuclear weapons in the past. They, of course, had the martial law thing. If you're South Korea, North Korea has nuclear weapons, why don't you? I think there's a valid argument there. And I believe nuclear nations do have the one-up on the United States and its allies because they know that U.S. policy, when China or Russia or anyone uses a nuclear weapon, it isn't to hit them back with a nuclear weapon, it's to respond conventionally because the United States believes its conventional forces are perhaps much greater than its nuclear forces, and therefore it doesn't need to do that. So, there is that kind of asymmetry there. But if you're Japan and you don't believe that the United States will come to your aid, will use the nuclear umbrella on you, I think maybe you do develop them. I think if you're Poland, I think perhaps you do the same thing. As we saw Poland ask the United States to transfer nuclear weapons to Poland, and J.D. Vance said no. So...
You didn't say thank you, yeah.
No, right. Poland did not say thank you, so they didn't get one. I would not appreciate a world with more nukes. However, and I know the writer No Opinion, or Noah Smith, I believe is his name, says that they need to develop more nuclear weapons. I don't know. I would be saddened to see there be more nuclear weapons. I think it would mark the end of American hegemony as we know it. I think that'd just be the clear sign of it. But I think more importantly, it makes the world more dangerous. However, I do understand why you would need one in the modern day. So I guess my stance on it is I don't support it. Do I understand it? Yes. Do I think Japan and Poland will make them? Maybe. It depends on how far we fall. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, do I think they'll make them? I'll say yes. But it seems like the situation has kind of stabilized this past week. And I know we're talking week-by-week basis, so that sounds crazy. Like, oh, it's fine this week, so maybe next week it won't be so bad. But I don't know. I do think we're heading in that direction, though. I do think you'll see Iran get one. I don't know about Sweden, but you will see Iran get one, and maybe you will see Japan and Poland obtain one. But we are in the nuclear bad times, and let's just hope they don't get used. Thoughts?
All right, so nuclear non-proliferation, I have never been able to say that word well. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 68, 70, went into force in 1970. All right, so since 1970, we have had 4 countries develop nuclear weapons. So I think a big part of this is like, how much do the norms matter versus actual protecting of a nation? So since 1970, we've got India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Look, on that list, we've got very close U.S. allies. Israel seems to be doing just fine. I can't say that their relationship with the U.S. has been hampered in the least since their development of nuclear weapons. And then we've got North Korea on the other side of that. I guess they just announced, like, we're actually going to withdraw from this treaty, and then, boop, nuclear weapons. So, I mean, there's been sanctions on North Korea, but if you look at the countries that have developed them, none of them have fallen at this point, right?
All right, so here's my pushback. I think, so one, Israel doesn't confirm or deny that it has nuclear weapons, specifically to avoid enforcement under the nuclear non-proliferation regime, right? The United States has no problem sanctioning countries. It sanctioned allies over this in the 60s and 70s. So that is, Israel has not officially acknowledged. We know they have them, but there's a reason there's not official acknowledgement. Pakistan and India were both under crippling sanctions, and then 9/11 happened. And those sanctions had to be lifted in order for the United States to pursue its mission objective in Afghanistan. So I would say, I mean, it's a fair point, but the fact that no one outside of Pakistan and India has gone and done it, especially, I mean, it took the World Trade Center falling, for Pakistan and India to lose their sanctions. So
let me put this another way. Do you think India, Pakistan, Israel, or North Korea are saying now look back and say it was a bad move to get nuclear weapons? My guess is they're all looking at it as like, we weathered the storm. Here we are.
I think you're right. I think Pakistan probably might regret it a little bit, although they're so intensely focused on India. But you know that Pakistan, they were so paranoid during the war in Afghanistan that the United States would come in and steal their nuclear weapons. And I mean, it wasn't like that far removed. The U.S. did have a plan to steal the nuclear weapons, but they started driving them around in unmarked white vans.
Love it. Great.
Crazy. Yeah. And
that's how shit goes
during
missing.
The nightmare years, as I'm sure you remember, when U.S. forces, the NATO forces, were pushing the Taliban into Pakistan, or they were retreating overnight, and then the fight was happening in Pakistan, where they were attacking the Pakistani security forces, which is suicide bombings to a level you had never seen before. I think,
and there's just nukes driving around in buses.
Yeah, nukes driving around in buses. And then at one point, there was a Pakistani nuclear weapon on a naval vessel, and the Pakistani Taliban took the naval vessel, and India had to come save the day. I mean, truly insane stuff going on there. But I think you're probably right. I mean, maybe no one regrets it, but I don't think anyone regrets getting nukes, I guess, besides South Africa, who dismantled them. But
no,
I don't think, I just think it doesn't, it's not the world we want to live in.
No, I don't want that to happen. I'm not arguing in favor of it. I'm in the same position as you, where I can understand why countries would be pushing in that direction, and we'll see. I think a big tell will be Iran as well. If Iran, there's speculation that they already have a weapon, kind of wide range speculation that they don't want to pursue it, all the way to they already have one. So I think that'll be a big indicator here as well.
Do you think the United States bombs Iran, as Trump's threatening, over this nuclear weapon? Do we see conflict here, or do you think it just all boils over and Iran says, well, we have a nuclear weapon, so deal with it?
I'm going to one-up you, and instead of answering that question, tell you about something funny from that realm this last week. It was reported on Fox Business. So I guess Trump said he sent a letter to Iran's leadership on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. But like by Friday, the Iran's mission to the UN was like, "What are you talking about? Where is this letter?" So, on the one hand, I feel like it probably was a letter, right? Like Trump strikes me as a guy that writes letters or types letters and sends them out. So Iran, there's no indication that they ever got that letter. Nobody knows where it is. It's a complete mystery. I would like to think that this was a very threatening letter with a deadline in it, and like it's just floating around somewhere now. Nobody knows. And that's in this meeting, funny. Marie Bartiromo, she asked Trump if he sent it to, and I'm always mixing up these names, but Khamenei.
Yeah.
And he said yes. I was like, wait. That's the guy that died in '89. Khamenei is the one that's. I always mix him up, but anyways,
the current guy.
See, this is the problem. I always mix it up.
Their names look identical. I think that's
exactly. Yeah. So when asked, like, wait, did you send it to this guy? And I think she was probably just saying it like in jest because like the former leader died in 1989. Trump said, yeah. So we have a possible ultimatum floating around. Who knows? D.C., maybe New York. Who knows? Maybe Tehran, even maybe addressed to the former deceased leader of Iran. That's probably where it stands. But I don't. It seems like we're talking tough on Iran, but more and more the indications I'm getting from Trump's statements is that he really wants to negotiate something. The problem there is Iran has been pretty adamant in saying absolutely not. So they're drawing a hard line.
What's so weird about the letter debacle is that I saw the Ayatollah, who's what we're talking about, whether it's Khamenei or Khamenei or whatever.
Khamenei.
Yeah. He was running his mouth about the letter, right? Act like, you've gotten a letter from President Trump, we're not going to respond to threats. We're not going to negotiate under a threat or whatever. And then only to find out that he hasn't actually received the letter is crazy.
The timeline might be off here. The original was a week ago when Trump, it was last Wednesday when Trump said he sent it.
Right.
And by Friday, Iran was like, what on earth are you talking about?
Yeah.
Now, Khamenei was going on some rants in the last couple of days, so it's possible he did get, maybe it was a replacement letter. Maybe the first one got returned, and the USPS was like, we can't deliver this kind of thing.
Return the sender? Yeah,
you kidding me?
I could see it.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty funny. But yeah, no, that's bonkers to me. So I don't think they're going to make a deal. I think Iran's just going to get a nuclear weapon.
I don't think Iran is top 20 on Trump's list right now. I feel like there's too many other things happening right now. Iran has kind of fallen off the radar, personally.
Are you kidding me? I think it's number one on his list.
What?
Yes, because all these other conflicts are very hard for him, right? But like he knows Iran. He thinks he can just bomb Iran and it'll have no actual consequences for anything else. So I think Iran is perhaps number one. I don't think he really particularly cares about what's going on in Europe outside of assisting Putin. And I don't really think he cares much about China at all. He definitely just doesn't care about China. So I think, I think this is I think Iran's like the perfect Trump objective.
All right, well, we can ask him next week when he's on the show, right?
Yeah, speaking of which, he never comes on. Anyways, our last two questions we have from the audience here is, how do you think intelligence sharing looks from now on? With Five Eyes and Saudi Arabia and Israel kind of not sharing all the stuff they have with us anymore, and people being much more cagey, especially in Europe, about sharing intelligence. Do you see the end of intelligence sharing, or do you think maybe we get off to a rough start, but we can continue forward?
This is a topic that can be very politically charged without any ability to point to facts, because there's been, since the campaign, allies of ours saying that they are going to be hesitant about sharing intelligence, not just with Trump, but then with people he's put into positions of power, like the DNI Gabbard was one that has been called out specifically. The challenge here is it is a very easy subject for our allies to say that and never have to provide any proof. Because how do you measure that? And the measurement is all done with, it can't necessarily be volume of intelligence, but even then, that's not coming out into the public.
Right.
So it's like having to say, well, we got this piece of sensitive data that we didn't share with the United States, that what? They're going to share with the Washington Post to make the point that they didn't share with the United States? So it's that's something I try to keep in mind with this is there's no way to disprove it. And any one of these allies tomorrow could say they have significantly reduced intel sharing because they don't trust Trump. And they might or they might not. We have no way to know for sure. I don't like that it's even a talking point. I think we're on the same page there. The fact that this is even in the conversation of being realistic sucks, because I do think even if you look at some of these, like in the Five Eyes, I believe the majority of the intelligence comes from the United States, but not all. And a lot of the threats we face are transnational. It's not just Russia. It's international terrorism, and they're crossing multiple borders and interacting in multiple different countries with, all different languages and currencies and platforms. So it helps us. It helps keep us safe when everybody's working together.
Agreed. We are stronger together. Someone once ran for that as their motto for president, and they lost. Any guesses?
Really? No.
Yeah. Name was Hillary Rodham Clinton. And
that was her thing, was stronger together, was her line?
We're stronger together, yeah. And people said, nope. Well, not really. I guess she won the popular vote. But anyways. I
don't even remember that being her line.
Yeah, she had I'm with her and Stronger Together. But Stronger Together was the better one.
Gotcha.
Anyways, thoughts on the stock market?
Nope.
You don't have any? That's our last question. Thoughts?
We're in it. I like to see it go up. Don't like to see it go down. I try not to pay too much attention because I have found that I don't have a lot of influence over what it does day to day. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster the last few weeks. Tesla seems like it's about to bottom out. That'll be interesting to see.
Speaking of Tesla, did you see it's domestic terrorism now to protest a Tesla dealership?
Is it really? I feel like I can't keep track of what's true and what's not true.
That's what Trump says, domestic terrorism. And then Pam Bondi went on Fox and said, if you're out there at the Tesla dealerships, we're coming for you.
Have you heard of...
This is crazy.
Have you heard of Duffel Blog?
I have seen it, yes.
Okay, so for anybody not familiar, it's a military satire paper. And, I love satire. And the best, I think, is when you can't actually tell. This is so close to possible that it might actually be a real story. And they put out a banger yesterday where they said Secretary of Defense Hegseth orders the United States to paint Z on all of their tanks, which is the Russian symbol on their tanks. And I saw that and I was like, this is going to reach a big audience that doesn't know what this is. And it did, and I love it. It was fake. It was made up. It was a joke. But that's where so much of our politics right now and our culture right now, things are so out of the blue, out of the ordinary, that I genuinely can't tell sometimes if it's real or not.
Well, I mean, did you see him selling? He wasn't selling cars. He was buying the Tesla outside of the White House.
It was kind of funny, yeah.
It was hilarious. But when you come to find out that the Australian Prime Minister had called like 7 times during that time frame to try to connect with President Trump to say, well, let's not do these tariffs or whatever. And there just had to be like, every time there used to be like, he's outside selling cars, doing an infomercial for Tesla. Sorry. And so
it's all computer.
It's all, wow, this is all computer. That's the funniest thing he's ever said. But the fact that like the Australian PM just, I guess, still has not talked to him, because just like, yeah, you're selling cars, what else do you want, is hilarious. But my thoughts on the stock market, I don't know. Does it ever stop sliding? I think here's what he just needs to do. If he's going to do the tariffs, just apply them. Just apply them. Say, I'm applying tariffs on April 2nd. And then when April 2nd hits, put the tariffs on. And then don't back away from them. Because every time he tweets, I'm putting a tariff here, or no tariffs, people just want stability.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And if we keep doing, the tariff circus every day where, the EU has 5 more tariffs, but China has 1 less, and Canada, maybe they have a tariff, maybe they don't, unless they join the United States, or whatever he said this week. It's, look, just calm down.
Cool it, man.
Yeah,
cool
just
it.
Cool out. All
I'm
right.
exhausted over here.
Yeah. I'm watching this, this investment portfolio, and I'm just like, it's too late to pull out now. Like, you just got to hope it goes back up. Anyways, folks, that is our episode for this week. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, follow, give us 5 stars on Spotify for watching. Oh, last week we had a poll. Remember we asked the audience, what do they think, who's going to resign first? 75% of the audience, with something like 30 votes, voted that Marco Rubio is the first one out.
Oh, he looks destroyed, man. His soul is gone.
Yeah, he looks over it. Yeah, and so I agree with them. I think that's what we both said. Do we have an idea for a question this week? And, of course, we'll have to do this on YouTube. I believe we had the capabilities to do it on YouTube, so they're not left out of our...
Yeah, community posts over on YouTube.
Yeah, community posts. So we'll have to do that. We will come up with something for y'all. And, it's always fun to see what people think, especially... I mean, nothing's worse, though, when I did the poll 2 weeks ago when I said Trump loves Ukraine now. And it was like 2 hours before the shakedown in the Oval Office.
Yeah, bad timing.
That was awful. And, of course, all the votes were like, he doesn't like Ukraine. Yeah, well, it's easy for you to say now.
Idiot.
Yeah. Anyways, folks, that will be our episode today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.